Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at BSidesSF 2025. I have a very special guest and presenter here today. I'm going to look up his name to make sure I say it properly. Adrian Sanabria. Sanabria. Darn it. Close. Okay. His topic is really cool. Preparing for dragons. Don't sharpen swords, set traps, and gather supplies. This is a headliner room, so he is definitely a special guest. I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you could do us a favor, if you have questions, we have a QR code for something called Slido. You can actually type in your questions, and I'm going to be happy to read them towards the end for our presenter. Okay? There it is. Very good. So if you take your phone, QR code it, type in your question, I'll be happy to read as many as I can towards the end. All right. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I will lead you to lunch out of this talk. So that's where I'll be heading directly as soon as I finish up. So you can follow me there if you have any questions that we didn't have time to answer. So this is definitely the biggest screen I've ever had the privilege to have my slides on. And I was worried about the footnote there, the resilience-based approach being unreadable, but I think it's probably very readable for most people. And I very much enjoyed Wendy's talk. How many here caught the keynote this morning? Wendy's keynote? Excellent. I did not change these. I didn't touch these slides after Wendy's keynote, but we worked together for a long time. She hired me in at 451 Research long time ago. And I guess we just think about things in similar ways. But I was delighted that we're going to have kind of a common theme running between my talk and the keynote there, or some similar themes. She covered a lot of ground. All right, so this talk, in addition to resilience, it's really about focusing. Cybersecurity covers so much ground. Who here has seen that CISO mind map of just all the things that CISOs have to worry about? Yeah, and it's just this enormous mind map. You have to zoom in on it to see anything. And it increases every day. You know, we've added AI safety to that. A lot of CISOs I've talked to have had fraud added to it. A lot of CISOs I know have to worry about executive protection, the physical security of their executives. So more and more gets added to it every day. So this talk is, a lot of it is about focusing on the right things and how we figure out what the right things are to focus on. So that's kind of what I mean by work smarter, not harder. And a lot of it is preparation and prevention, are things that we do in the downtime, right, whenever that happens. And less chasing dragons, which I now realize, I think that means something in drug slang. I'm not sure what that means, but in this context, when I say less chasing dragons, think the RSA Expo floor, right? Think the billions in marketing that's there to distract you and convince you that the latest threat, whether it be AI or quantum, is something that you should be spending time on, as opposed to the things that are actually going to make a difference. So thinking about this, threats are very public. And when new threats come out, it's very easy to imagine issues. We see all kinds of really cool side channel attacks. We see stunt hacking. We see a lot of stuff that's really never going to be a risk for your organization, but it's very visible, which makes it easy for vendors to latch onto, create companies around, market around. And yeah, this is, I've got, I think, 2 or 3 slides that you probably want to take a picture of, and this is one of them. Very bullet point heavy. I'm sorry, didn't spend enough time to eliminate bullet points from this talk, so there will be bullet points. And I've worked in marketing for startups, right? And something you get very, very tired of writing is the threat landscape is constantly evolving, or cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated. And one of the things I do, I do some research when I have time. And one of them is doing postmortems of breaches, understanding how companies fail. And vast majority of the time, and sure there's exceptions where sophisticated, interesting things happen in attacks, but most of them look like a mediocre pen test from 2010, done by junior pen testers. They're not that sophisticated. They're not evolving that much because they don't really need to. There's still a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. There's sonic walls, that people have forgotten about, that have default credentials or haven't been updated. There's a reason we're constantly seeing Ivanti, Fortinet, Sonic Wall, the names of router and firewall and VPN providers, all this legacy hardware that's out there. And on the flip side, when somebody has a really good day in security, it doesn't make any headlines. We're not exposed to that. It's constantly, it's post-quantum encryption, the threat of quantum computing are the headlines we're seeing. Meanwhile, you don't see the headline about the company that switched half their people to Chromebooks and a lot of problems went away, right? Or had really good outbound filtering and the C2 didn't work, or the exploit came in but couldn't create a connection back out. So on one side, we have the industry's produced these very threat-specific products. You're going to buy a product just for SaaS security posture management, or just for one specific area of, like SCA for application security. We've got all these, these little tools around, and maybe SCA isn't the best example there because it's not really threat specific. But the things where, it's attached to specific TTPs on the MITRE ATT&CK framework, or it's attached to very specific threat actors or types of threats, versus the more broad defenses that can help you across the board with a lot of things. That gets you a lot of the way there without having a lot of overhead. And another thing about threat-specific products is they tend to be high labor but very low efficacy. If you think about the average SOC and the amount of those alerts that are something you actually want to, maybe contain a breach or, take some kind of action like that. You look at the numbers, you look at the ratio or the percentage of those alerts you actually want to worry about. It's at the point now where we have an entire market of solutions that generate the noise, and then another market of solutions that sit on top of that one and try and filter that noise back out that the first solutions generate, right? So if you think about your SIMs, now we have all SecOps AI. We're going to eliminate the triage layer of SecOps with LLMs or something like that. Or in vulnerability management, we got the risk-based vulnerability management where step one is give us that noisy report that came out of Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, give us those scan results, and we'll clean it up for you, prioritize it for you. So it's just kind of madness that we're stacking these things on here. The fixes for the problems that are created by things that we all pay for. And I think one of the things I want to highlight on the defense side is when I do this analysis of breaches and how companies fail, I can't think of a single case where I was like, yeah, they needed a ZTNA solution. That would have stopped it. They were missing some tool or something that they bought. They had things that were misconfigured and very broken processes, a lot of assumptions, which is something that Wendy talked about earlier. And yeah, best intentions, but lots of bad assumptions is what I tend to find. So kind of good news, bad news. Like it's a lot of work to do foundational security stuff, but you probably already have everything that you need. So that kind of leads me to this idea of enlightenment: chop wood, carry water. Before enlightenment, after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. That no matter how sophisticated you get on the defensive side, how much progress you make here, you're still having to do these basic fundamentals of, making sure when employees leave, their access is revoked, making sure MFA is enabled on all the accounts. Just this almost checklist type stuff. And prioritizing the fundamentals, though, like a lot of people talk about fundamentals, but even just looking at asset management, like it's overwhelming to try and do a good job with that, to try and put together a good asset list for both software and hardware. And there's a lot of prioritization you need to do there to be successful at it. And 20 years ago in security, 15 years ago, when we came up with best practices, we were guessing in a lot of cases. We thought, this NAC seems like a good idea, right? Network access control or application control seems like a good idea. Or making people change their password every 90 days seems like a good idea. But we are, thanks in part to ransomware, flush with data on what works and doesn't work now. And there's reports getting released almost every day that will help you prioritize that foundational work and say, okay, I need to have really good data flow diagrams. I need to be really aware of where my customer data is stored, where it's going, all that kind of stuff. So these are kind of the 8 steps we're going to go through. I don't think the timer ever started, so I'll just use my watch. I've kind of broken things down into these 8 steps. They're not all discrete, like some of these, like recovery, survive and recover, a lot of that stuff, where we're talking about resilience, keeping the business up and running. That stuff goes on all the time during a lot of these other steps. All right, let's jump in. So step 1, and I don't know if anybody noticed the first slide. At this point, maybe you've already forgotten, but what was wrong with that first slide, that title slide I had up? Yeah, the horse is great. Yeah, AI is great, right? Yeah. I didn't ask for fire. I just asked for a dragon, I think, and it decided to throw the knight in there, riding the horse, and the horse is breathing fire. It's a work in progress. Yeah, so reducing attack surface is huge. I do a lot of enterprise advisory work, and one day I do a lot of vulnerability management as well, and I'm talking to somebody about their vulnerability management process in Excel. I say, why don't you just share your screen? I feel like it would be easier than you describing this stuff to me. Just, we have an NDA, let me just see what you're looking at. And they share their screen, and clearly you can tell what we're looking at are web servers. From the name of the hosts, you can tell they're external web servers. And just looking at some of the vulnerabilities there, immediately you could tell these are just default Red Hat enterprise servers. No hardening's been done. It's running all the services that come out of the box. Everything is still installed. They're running cups on enterprise, on external web servers, right? Why are you running printing services on your external web servers? And just imagine how much easier vulnerability management is when you pull those 16,000 software packages off these systems that don't need to be there. When you shut down all these services, you shut down all these ports. And it's a lot of work. And in some cases, companies that I work with have done this work, but now the image is 3 years old. And the moment they build 8 new servers, the trend line on vulnerabilities just snaps right up. Because that image is 3 years old, and now they have to patch all over again. Now they're 3 years behind again. So they're constantly 1 step forward, 2 steps back because of that. So data as well. If we look at the FTC and the fines they're handing out, a lot of them are for storing too much data about customers, which is kind of antithesis to with AI. Companies want to take advantage of that data and collect as much data as possible. So it's kind of, we have a contradiction here. But less mess makes everything easier. Shoring up passive defenses. These are things that just protect you because half your employees are using Chromebooks, like I mentioned earlier. Like there are whole classes of attacks that now don't work. Very carefully choosing the application framework that you use can cut out entire classes. That's why people build stuff in Rust. That's why, maybe you limit the kinds and variety of WordPress plugins that you use, to just a few very well-maintained plugins. But a lot of these architectural choices, and you'll notice as we're going through here, IT and the choices they make control a lot of your pain and security here. So a lot of these things we are dependent on the IT side for. But if we can guide them and we can say, what if we use this framework instead? There are opportunities here to make things easier. Just proactive tech refresh. I remember Scientia did a report with Cisco on security outcomes. And one of them showed, I think it was the best thing you can do for employee morale is proactive tech refresh. Like just not making people have to take care of stuff that's end of life, out of support, old and clunky, buying parts on eBay. Just that can erase so much attack surface and take care of so many of these problems. So I'm thinking of these as passive defenses. And upgrading defenses as you go. If you remember the flow from earlier, this is where the arrow comes back to. And having this process flow, I feel like we need some version of Sigma 6 or Six Sigma for cybersecurity, or maybe it just works as is for cybersecurity. But this concept of constant process improvement, which means you have to track how good of a job you're doing, which means you have to have some way of measuring value in your processes, the products you have, the services you have, and replace them as needed. But this is where you're going to apply new lessons learned. This is where that lessons learned comes back from incident response, or it doesn't have to be your own failures. Maybe you're reading a report and you learn a really good lesson from that report. This is where you put that in. This is where the feedback loops tie back to. And I mentioned underperforming services and products here. The idea that a product can have negative value is a very real thing. I'm sure some of you have experienced this, where you buy a security product and not only does it do nothing for you, it creates overhead. It eats up people's time and resources that could be working on other things. So when I say negative value, that's what that means. That means this thing has entered your life, it's just a pain in your butt, and it gives you nothing back. You get no value, no benefit from it. So yeah, it doesn't go to zero. Value goes below zero when you're measuring that. And you can measure that in dollars. So you can take the salary of the people working on it. And I used to do this. I used to have a spreadsheet. Say, okay, we bought FireEye. Here's the number of times it's actually caught a piece of malware that could have gone on our systems, which was 0, 100% false positives with it, with the old NX appliance. And here's the amount of time we spend on it. Every time there's a false positive, they want us to jump into the command line, run this command, create a zip file of all the logs, FTP it to a server. This is 2012, maybe it's not FTP today, but it took 4 hours of time every time we had a false positive. And they'd come back and say, yeah, just take the hash of that binary and put it in the allow list, right? Like that. Why is this thing sitting here? Why do we pay $250,000 for this thing that just burns our time, just sets fire to our resources? So step 4, understanding, so this kind of builds on what we talked about earlier, reading industry reports. There's amazing stuff out there. There's, I mentioned Scientia before. They did a meta study of all the ransomware reports that different vendors had put out and made a heat map, basically, of the MITRE ATT&CK framework and said, okay, here's the things attackers are actually doing. Because the MITRE ATT&CK framework is an encyclopedia of everything that's possible, not everything that's actually happening, right? So you shouldn't aim to have a detection for everything in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You're just going to end up with endless amounts of noise. And there are reports out there that will tell you, here is what's happening. The Verizon data breach report for 2025 just came out. Has a lot of good data in it. Will help you focus on those fundamentals, on prioritizing the fundamentals that you work on. Speed of exploitation. Also a big one here. I think the DBIR also says for critical or for exploited vulnerabilities, it's 5 days before we start seeing it exploited from when vulnerability disclosure happens. And for edge focus, so the Fortinet, for whatever reason, the management port of your Palo Alto firewall is hanging out on the public internet, 0 days is the number for that one. You're going to see it within 24 hours of that disclosure happening, because all the attackers have to do is put together a script and just auto-pwn across the entire internet. And that's what they do. Oh, and yeah, last point there, don't just share intel, share solutions. So whether it's through ISACs, however you do it, defenders need to spend, I've talked to so many defenders that are like, hey, look at this cool way that I do this. Have you talked about this? Have you released anything open source? Have you shared this? No. Like, don't tell me about it. Tell everybody about it. Like, this is something really useful. People can do cheap, and that probably doesn't occur to them with the tools and resources they already have. So preparing countermeasures. This is kind of like passive defense, but the active version of it. So this is where you have broad mitigations, outbound filtering, exploit prevention, the ability to do virtual patching. Maybe it's going to be a week, it's going to be a month before you get a patch out. What mitigations can you do to prevent that exploitation from happening, or neutering the exploitation, the ability to pivot or reach back out to C2, whatever that mitigation might look like based off of the new 0 day, the new vulnerability. There's a lot of mitigations you can do. In fact, you could think of the patch itself as a mitigation, right? That's the preferred mitigation, but since it comes with availability loss, maybe we want to consider some other things. Maybe it's a WAF or something like that. Yeah, so reducing the effectiveness of the attack is what we're after there. All right, so if stuff does get through, we want to make sure we know how to handle it when it does. We still see a lot of organizations where obviously from the outside, their PR folks did not know how to handle the breach. Their executives are panicking. They're denying everything. I think we saw this recently with Oracle on 2 different breaches at the same time. That is not the way to handle a breach. You can very much tell either somebody's unprepared for it or they've got a lot of lawyers. They're one of 2 explanations for handling a breach that way and denying what's going on. But beyond just the PR aspect of it, just the technical aspects of it, when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about keeping the business up and running. We're talking about keeping operations going, keeping revenue coming in. So let's say, like what happened with the CVE program happens with Let's Encrypt tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow, all your certificates need to renew. But Let's Encrypt is gone. And that's where you're pulling all your certs from. How quickly, how agile are you to handle that kind of a problem if that rug gets pulled out from under you? So yeah, tabletop tough decisions. And again, this should be based off of what's actually happening. Let's Encrypt, that would be kind of a black swan event, right? We don't have any data to suggest that is going to happen. But yeah, eventually you get to those kinds of black swan events that you want to prepare for. But that's probably not the first thing you need to be worrying about. And monitoring queries, like that's a real fun one. That somebody turned me on to a couple of weeks ago, where they find a lot of breaches just by all of a sudden somebody's searching for passwords, searching for these like really obvious, like somebody shady is in our environment. Either it's an internal risk, an internal issue with an employee, or somebody from the outside has gotten in and now they're using Microsoft Copilot to look for juicy stuff in our environment. So monitoring queries is a good opportunity. Deception is severely underused, I think, in the industry, particularly for folks that maybe you outsource a SOC, you use an MSP for that, or an MSSP, or I think for pretty much everyone. I don't know how this started, but there's this view that you need to be really mature before you start thinking about deception, using it for detecting attacks that have gotten in. I think it's the absolute reverse. I think you can set up some good fake accounts, fake data, some fake traps. Just go to canarytokens.org. There's stuff you can do for free. There's a lot of open source on GitHub, a lot of honeypots, honey token solutions out there. There's some commercial ones as well. And you can know the moment somebody gets in your system. And those things should fire every time you have a pen test. And this is something where you should be able to get it down to 0 false positives pretty easily. And there's not a lot of detections out there where you can do that. So this is a quick way to kind of shortcut this ability to figure out what's going on in your environment. And this is the ultimate goal: survive, recover, and thrive. So as quickly as you can get back to day-to-day routine, I don't think we get extra points for preparing for APT 5, 6, 7, 8, versus just keeping the business running. I think this is one of those disconnects between the business and security departments where, I've seen people just go down the rabbit hole on trying to figure out how to secure against exotic vulnerabilities and attack techniques and things like that, when the only reason you're there is to keep things up and running. So yeah, anti-DDoS, quick backup recovery. And do you test this stuff or not? That's the other thing. You kind of need permission from the business to break stuff to get to resilience. I don't think any of us can get to resilience as long as we have somebody saying, you can't scan that VLAN, things will fall over. Well, if they fall over, we need to solve that problem. All right, here's the feedback loop again. And so talking a little bit about continuous improvement here again, super important, learning from these lessons. Every time we have a failure, somebody else has a failure. This should feed back into this cycle where we improve the work that we do. And it requires measuring a lot of stuff. Like how often has your MSSP actually brought something to your attention that was a problem versus you finding it yourself? Have you tested your MSSP? I don't know how friendly they are with this kind of thing, but make something happen on your network. We used to create a file, an Excel spreadsheet, and just put it on a file server. This is 20 years ago. And then we delete it. And then we tell the backup admins it was super important. And we found maybe 10% of the time they were able to recover that file. And that was really useful information. So as we outsource more and more to managed providers, we need to know that percentage. All right, takeaways. This is the other one you probably want to take out your phone for. I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but this kind of sums things up. The CIS 18 is really useful. And I'm not anti-vendor. I do a lot of work with vendors, but man, there are a lot of distractions out there. And they have a lot of money to distract you with. So that's kind of the key takeaway from here is read these amazing reports that are out there telling you how people are actually getting in, how damages are actually occurring, and focus on that. Prioritize your fundamental work on that and not on the latest, agentic quantum AI, whatever. All right. All these pictures were done with AI. It did a lot better than, I don't know if any of you saw my talk last year, but the images were pretty bad. So I'm kind of testing the quality of AI image generation as I give talks at BSides San Francisco. And I think that's a decent likeness of me.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. Amazing, right? I love that his presentation was in tandem with Mary's, our keynote speaker. So thank you so much for that. A couple quick.
Coincidental.
Say again?
Completely coincidental.
Completely a coincidence? I think not. Collective consciousness. All right. What documents can beginners use to get started reducing their attack surface in their personal environment?
Ooh.
Mike.
Yeah. In their personal environment, I think you need to, so there are a lot of services out there like Delete Me that will do a lot of this stuff for you, that will kind of crawl, but like learning OSINT techniques, there's a bunch of tools out there that are free that you can use to, just Googling yourself, just using search engines is a pretty good start. And just look up OSINT tools, maybe go to some OSINT training. There's OSINT training online and things like that, but learning different OSINT techniques, I think you can do a pretty good job in discovering and really those techniques, anything you learn there is going to translate to your organization as well. And that's another thing is the line that blurs personal and business is gone. Like I mentioned, some of these CISOs being responsible for executive protection, that involves that executive's, that CEO's home network. They now have to worry about what's on their CISO's home network. That is a CISO's job now.
One final question before we break for lunch. What specific surface do you recommend to learn about insurance payouts and their root causes?
Yeah, so there's some insurtechs out there. Cowbell Cyber is a great one that will put out some reports. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but I know Cowbell Cyber recently put out a report. Yes, and it's spelled cowbell like you think it would be spelled. It's a funny name. But yeah, and we're seeing one of the things we're seeing out of those reports is to give you a bonus. DBIR says 30%, Cowbell Cyber says 40% of breaches are coming from third parties. So that's third party risk management is going to need a whole lot more focus as far as those fundamentals go.
Fantastic. So as one of our headliners, we have a little special gift for you. I also want to mention that Adrian also helps run the B-Sides in Knoxville, Tennessee, which will be May 9th, I believe. Yes. So we're very pleased and proud to have him as part of our team here this year. Thank you so much. Please give him a great round of applause. Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing.